Hey everyone. So I recently spoke with Andrew Chanin. He's the CEO at ProcureAM, and they run the space ETF known to investors by the ticker UFO. And we had a great conversation about where the space industry is going, particularly around space tourism. And in this portion of our conversation, we get a little bit more into the nitty gritty of managing a fund like the UFO ETF and some things that investors should really be looking out for and keeping in mind as they evaluate these kinds of ETFs. Take a look. I want to take a little bit of a closer look at the fund, the Procure fund that you manage, the UFO, because as you mentioned, so many of these technologies are disruptive, but some of them are still probably a long way off to coming online or coming to fruition. So, can you just maybe talk about the philosophy behind the fund and maybe how you balance kind of that long-term outlook with getting performance outcomes in the present?
So UFO is the first pure play focused space ETF. And for us, what was really important was working with an index partner that truly understood the space industry. And an individual named Michael Walter Range, a former director of research for the Space Foundation, with a background in astrophysics and space policy, someone that really understands the technologies the companies involved, actually helped develop the model for the Space Foundation to calculate and ascertain the size of the global space economy. So it's figuring out what types of companies, what industries, what technologies comprise this overall space economy is something that he helped build over 15 years ago and helped manage that model for roughly a decade after its inception. And that's something that global powers and people following the space industry use on a regular basis to understand how this market is evolving over time. And through what he's done is he's actually looked for companies that are deriving significant amounts of revenues from space. So being a pure play space ETF, actually deriving revenues from space, believe it or not, was something that was to us very important. And so actually going through and doing the challenging work of understanding what these actual companies are doing, he's amassed a massive universe of potential companies, and looking at those that are deriving over a majority of its revenues from space related business activities and services comprises at least 80% of the fund. But understanding that there are also very major players that might be more diversified, but are absolute forces within the space industry, it made sense to also include some of these more diversified aerospace and defense names. So you'll find up to 20% of the fund at rebalance can also have exposure to these companies that, although they aren't deriving majority of their revenues from space, they're deriving at least 20% or over $500 million annually from space. So as you can see, the components that you have in the fund, which right now is roughly 40 companies from around the world specializing in all different areas of space, are ones that are truly deriving a significant amount of their revenues from this actual industry that we're looking to provide investors exposure to.
Yeah, and if you could expound a little bit on the point, because I feel like with a lot of ETFs that are coming out today, not just with space, but in so many industries, why it's so important for investors to really kind of look under the hood and see, what names are actually in these things. Because as you said, you could be investing in a fund that is saying it's a space ETF, but there's all sorts of different names in there that probably have nothing to do with space. So if you could just maybe elaborate on that point a little bit.
I've been involved in developing numerous first to market types of ETFs over the years. And for me, one of the most important things is lining yourself up and licensing an index that you believe truly represents that industry. And space was something that was, in my mind, no different. So, many different funds you'll see over time. It might be a technology fund, and your top names are your typical Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. And chances are you already have large exposure to that in other funds. And when you look at the percentage of revenues that some of these really large companies have that are actually related to some of these industries that they might fall into a very specialized thematic fund, in many cases it's 1% or maybe even less of overall what they do. But just because it's a large name and maybe there aren't enough names to actually give a fund a pure play focus, they end up having very heavy weights. And so you'll see people that have significant exposures to many of the same companies, even though they might be in completely different kind of thematic funds. So for us, yes, you might have some overlap with other holdings that you may have, But this is something where there is, not that much overlap and correlation with other existing ETFs out there. Even if you're looking in the space industry, specifically, or aerospace and defense, there may be some overlap. But I think a big differentiator for us is having an index provider that's actually going in and understanding the companies that are there. It's not necessarily, oh, well, this company in the future may be involved in this type of thing that's involved in space, and therefore they're in the fund already. These are companies that are already heavily, or and in many cases entirely, involved and focused on space.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. As always, you can get more videos like this by hitting the subscribe button below. And I really would like to know your thoughts in this area. Are you more of that kind of passive long-term investor? Are you more someone who wants to take a more active approach? Let me know in the comment section below. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.